Hi everyone. Today I'm joining you from a very special location, Paris. This is another great place in Europe that you can get to pretty easily from Germany. For me, it was just a 2-hour flight from Berlin. Now, I know that there are millions of videos about Paris, so I thought I'd do something a little bit different that hopefully hasn't been done as many times. I'm going to show you what Paris is like in the winter. Low skates. Let's start with the waterfront along the Seine River, which cuts right through the city. I think this is where you can really see a big difference in the winter. Paris is of course known for its waterfront and gorgeous views from its many famous bridges. Here you can see Pont Neuf on the western tip of Ile de la Cite Island. When I visited, the river was very brown and quite high. This is because it rained more than usual this year, but I really don't think the river always looks this way in the winter. Anyways, here's the view I had on 2 different days, one rainy and one sunny. Looking in the opposite direction on a rainy morning, you can just faintly see the Eiffel Tower in the distance. Even with the cold weather, you can see that there are still some hardy people out exercising in the park along the river. This is also the area where many of the famous booksellers have their stalls on the riverfront path. As you can see, they are mostly closed this time of year. The next bridge over from the Pont Neuf is called Pont des Arts. This is a pedestrian bridge that's near the Louvre and can be taken to the Institut de France Cultural Center in the Saint-Germain district. It has awesome views looking back at Pont Neuf and the Ile de la Cite in one direction and the Eiffel Tower, when it's clear, in the other direction. You can even hear the wind howling because it was very windy that day. Next, I went to Pont Saint-Michel near Sainte-Chapelle Cathedral, which I'll talk about more later. This bridge has some great views of Notre Dame, which I'll also talk about shortly. Just behind Notre Dame, there are some great river views from another island, Ile Saint-Louis. The views are really nice here, and they include a really good view of the famous Hotel de Ville. A little further down the river was the last major bridge that I went to, the Pont Alexandre. This bridge sits near the Grand Palais Exhibition Hall. Pont Alexandre is the most ornate bridge in Paris, and many people, including myself, find it to be the most beautiful too. And it also has some great views looking down the river towards the Eiffel Tower. As you can see, the water levels around this area were so high that they even covered some of the waterfront path. The river's current was also quite strong, but there were still some river sightseeing boats running at this time of year. Okay, now let's check out some of the main attractions in Paris in wintertime. First, here is Sainte-Chapelle Cathedral. This church is known for its spectacular stained glass windows. I have to say, even in winter, there was a pretty long wait to get into Sainte-Chapelle. I stood in line for an hour and a half before I finally got in, and I had a reservation. I can't even imagine what it's like trying to get in here in the summer. Even though it's quite beautiful, the church itself is pretty small, so I'm not quite sure if it was really worth such a long wait in the cold and the rain. Next, I took the subway over to see the Eiffel Tower from the Trocadero Terrace. This is definitely a stunning viewpoint, but it was still pretty busy despite the bitterly cold wind. I'm sure this spot is jam-packed with people in the summer. I didn't take time to go up the Eiffel Tower on this trip, but I'm sure it's much easier to do in the winter, though I imagine it's really cold up there this time of year. Anyhow, after soaking in that awesome Eiffel Tower view, I went to Notre Dame. I also had a reservation for this, but thankfully I went right in without having to freeze, waiting in some epic line outside. I was actually surprised by how much construction was still being done here. Some of the exterior and the park behind the cathedral are still being renovated, but the interior was finished and I found it awe-inspiring. Even though I've been to many beautiful cathedrals in Europe, this is definitely one of the best, and I really loved it. By the way, right across the river from Notre Dame is the famous Shakespeare and Company bookstore. Even in winter, there was still a pretty long wait to get in to check it out. Next, on one of the sunnier days here during the week, I went up to see the rooftop views from the Galerie Lafayette department store. The view was really nice, but it was super busy even in winter. I found that the rooftop terrace at the Printemps department store right next door was actually much better. The terrace here is nicer, and there were hardly any people at all. On one of the rainier days of my trip, I went to the Musée d'Orsay to escape the crappy weather for a bit. Now, this museum is known for having the largest collection of Impressionist art in the world. So, being a big fan of Impressionism, I thought it was something I should definitely see. And, with a reservation, there was no problem getting in. But I was surprised by how busy the museum was. This famous piece by Van Gogh seemed to draw the most attention. But while there were some paintings here that I enjoyed, the majority didn't do much for me. This was probably because the focus seemed mostly to be paintings of people, which I don't really find to be so interesting. But anyhow, after going to the museum, another major site that I went to was the Sacré-Cœur Cathedral in the Montmartre neighborhood. As I climbed up its famous stairs on a very foggy and rainy morning, I thought the views probably weren't going to be that good. Man, was I wrong. It turned out that the views with the clouds and the fog were really special. I actually saw a local jogger stop her run just to snap some pictures because I really don't think this is a view you see that often. It was also pretty awesome that hardly anyone was here at the time. Without the crowds, it was also really easy to get into the cathedral, and inside, it was very impressive. Moving on, let's see what some of Paris's most popular, well-known parks and plazas are like in the winter. The first park I went to was Luxembourg Gardens. I'm willing to bet that this gorgeous park is overrun with people in the summer. But it wasn't so crowded in the winter, though there were still a fair number of people here when I visited. The worst thing about this park is that the hideous Montparnasse Tower, one of the ugliest buildings in the world, looms over it. But besides that, the park is really nice and has its own views of the Eiffel Tower. After that, on the sunniest day of the week, I went to Place Vendôme, a striking plaza in an area with mostly upscale shops. Since this plaza doesn't have any trees, it probably doesn't look that much different in winter, except that there are fewer people here. Next, I went to the nearby Royal Palace with its famous striped columns courtyard. Again, I'm sure this place is overrun in the summer, but it was great to see it without all the crowds. The park nearby was also really nice, and I was happy to find daffodils blooming in February. Right next to the Royal Palace is the world-famous Louvre Museum. Since I didn't have a lot of time set aside to spend in this massive museum, I decided to save it for a future trip. But I did go to the plaza, and it really blew me away. I was definitely amazed at how big it actually is. Just west of the Louvre is the massive Tuileries Garden Park. There are lots of trees here, so in the winter everything is very brown and the paths have lots of puddles. But I think it's still really beautiful. Right next to the Tuileries Garden is another famous plaza, Place de la Concorde. This space is also huge. While it's nice, I actually didn't like it as much because it just seems too big and the traffic nearby is really loud too. But I heard this plaza is going to be redesigned in the coming years to make it more pedestrian friendly, which would be great. Next, there's the wonderful Place des Vosges in the Marais neighborhood. Unlike Place de la Concorde, this is a much smaller neighborhood plaza that feels really comfortable. I think this place must be extremely popular in the warmer months. Overall, I was really impressed by the whole design of this plaza with its fountains, trees, benches, statue, and all of the beautiful buildings around the edge. Moving on to another comfortably sized space that I really enjoyed, let's take a look at Place Dauphine. This plaza can be found right next to Pont Neuf on Ile de la Cite Island. When I was there, I overheard a tour guide say that this plaza is bustling with people on summer nights. This makes sense since it looks like a really great place to hang out and enjoy its many restaurants. The next site I saw was Place du Tertre, which is close to Sacré-Cœur Cathedral. This place is known for having lots of caricature artists in the warmer months, but there were just a few here braving the cold when I visited. While it was quite nice to see in winter, this plaza seems like it could become a major tourist trap in the summer. Anyways, the last park I want to mention is not really a park at all, it's a cemetery. The Père Lachaise Cemetery is over 200 years old, and it's the final resting place of many famous figures like Frédéric Chopin, Jim Morrison, Camille Pissarro, Gertrude Stein, Oscar Wilde, and many more. It's also an interesting place to walk around, particularly on a rainy winter day. Hopefully, I can come back to Paris someday to see all of these parks and plazas in nicer weather when everything is in full bloom and thriving with activity. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the most interesting neighborhoods in Paris in winter. I stayed in the Saint-Germain neighborhood near the Latin Quarter. I thought it was a great location since it's full of shops and restaurants, and it's really close to many of the sites I've already mentioned, like Notre Dame, Saint-Chapelle, Pont-Neuf, Luxembourg Gardens, and more. Now, as you might expect, Paris has many great restaurants, but there are a couple in Saint-Germain that I particularly enjoyed that I thought were worth mentioning. First, this place, Chow, has great Chinese food, like their awesome Biang Biang noodles. And this place, called Patate, had some amazing fresh-cut fries with a wide variety of toppings available. Now on to 3 more areas that I went to. First, there's a little pedestrian shopping street not too far away from the Eiffel Tower called Rue Claire. This cute little street is full of shops, restaurants, and cafes, and it's just really nice, especially in winter when you can avoid the crowds. Next, I've already mentioned a few places to see in the Montmartre neighborhood, like Sacré-Cœur. But winter is also a great time to walk through this neighborhood to really get a feel for it without so many tourists around. When I was walking here, I stumbled onto this place, Moulin de la Galette, which I later found out is the same place Renoir captured in one of his most famous paintings that I saw at the Musée d'Orsay. The last neighborhood I went to, which also happens to be one of my personal favorites, is the Marais. This is where the Place des Vosges is located. Anyway, I really enjoyed the narrow streets lined with shops and restaurants here. As an added bonus, the Marais also has some really cool street art. And the epic Hotel de Ville. Thanks for joining me on this cold, windy, and rainy trip to Paris in the winter. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, please be sure to like and subscribe. That's it for now. Tschüss, bis später.